The first time I held a chisel, I was 6 years old. I remember the weight of it in my small hands, the cool metal against my palm, and the way my father's eyes lit up as he guided my fingers. "This, Harper," he said, his voice filled with a reverence I'd come to associate with woodworking, "this is how we shape the world. I'm Harper Lewis, and I've been shaping wood ever since. Our family's furniture business, Lewis and Sons, yes, Sons, despite my existence, has been the backbone of our small town for generations. The scent of sawdust and varnish is as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Growing up, I spent every spare moment in our workshop, learning the secrets hidden in each grain of wood, discovering the stories waiting to be told in every knot and whirl. But in our family, being good wasn't enough. Being the best wasn't enough. Being a girl, well, that was never going to be enough. My older brother, Ethan, was the golden child. He was groomed from birth to take over the business, despite showing about as much talent for woodworking as a fish for cycling. Meanwhile, I was relegated to the helper, my designs and innovations quietly fueling our success while Ethan took the credit. "It's just how things are done, Harper," my mother would say, patting my cheek with a patronizing smile. "You'll understand when you're older." I understood perfectly well. I understood every time I saw my father beam with pride at Ethan's clumsy attempts at carving. I understood when my intricate designs were passed off as collaborative efforts. I understood when I overheard my parents discussing my future, and the word marriage came up far more often than career. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. The only place I found solace was beneath the sprawling branches of the old willow tree in our backyard. Its gnarled trunk and cascading leaves seemed to whisper secrets of patience and perseverance. I'd sit there for hours, sketching designs in my notebook, dreaming of a day when my work would be recognized for what it was, art. Little did I know, that day would come. But not in the way I expected. Not in the way anyone expected. The day my parents announced their retirement should have been a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral for my dreams. "We're handing over the reins to Ethan," my father declared over Sunday dinner, beaming at my brother. "It's time for the next generation to take Lewis and Sons into the future." I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, as the words washed over me. It wasn't a surprise, not really. But hearing it stated so plainly, so finally, felt like a physical blow. "What about Harper?" my Aunt Mildred asked, always the one to state the obvious that everyone else politely ignored. My mother's laugh was brittle. "Oh, Harper will still be involved, of course. She'll be Ethan's right-hand woman, won't you, dear?" I nodded mechanically, the taste of bile rising in my throat. Right-hand woman. Helper. Second fiddle. The story of my life, condensed into a neat little job description. Ethan, for his part, looked like he'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, he had. "Don't worry, sis," he said, reaching across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. "I'll make sure you're well taken care of." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to show them the calluses on my hands, the designs that filled notebook after notebook. I wanted to make them see me. Instead, I smiled tightly and excused myself, fleeing to the sanctuary of the willow tree. As I leaned against its sturdy trunk, I made a silent vow. This wouldn't be the end of my story. Somehow, someway, I would carve my own path. I just didn't know then how rocky and twisted that path would become. It took Ethan exactly 8 months to run our family's legacy into the ground. I watched it happen in slow motion, like a train wreck you can see coming but are powerless to stop. He made grandiose promises to modernize, to expand, to disrupt the industry. What he actually did was alienate our longtime customers, waste money on flashy marketing campaigns, and consistently deliver subpar products. All the while, I was there in the background, desperately trying to hold things together. I worked longer hours than ever, my hands raw and bleeding from the constant work. I reached out to our old clients, smoothing ruffled feathers and promising that yes, we could still deliver the quality they expected. I designed piece after piece, each one a small masterpiece, hoping that the sheer beauty of the work would be enough to save us. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday in April. I arrived at the workshop to find Ethan in a panic, surrounded by a sea of paperwork. "Harper, thank God you're here," he said, his face pale. "We're in trouble. Big trouble." As he explained, my heart sank. We were bankrupt. The business that had supported our family for generations was on the brink of collapse. "But you can fix this, right?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with desperation. "You always fix things." I stared at him, speechless. This was beyond fixing. This was catastrophic. That evening, my parents called a family meeting. I expected anger, recriminations, perhaps even an acknowledgement that they had made a mistake in choosing Ethan to lead. What I got instead was a united front of expectation. "Harper," my father said, his voice grave, "we need you to step up. Your brother needs your support now more than ever." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Support? He's run the business into the ground. What exactly am I supposed to do? My mother reached out, patting my hand in that patronizing way she had. "We know you have some savings, dear. And those little side projects you do, surely you can contribute that money to help get us back on our feet. And we'll need you to sign over any designs you've been working on," Ethan chimed in. "We can use those to rebuild the brand." They looked at me expectantly, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. As if I should be eager to sacrifice everything I had worked for to save them from their own mistakes. For a moment, I was that little girl again, desperate for approval, willing to do anything to be seen as valuable. But then I felt something shift inside me. A lifetime of resentment, of being overlooked and undervalued, crystallized into a hard, sharp edge of resolve. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. They stared at me in shock. "What do you mean, no?" my father sputtered. "I mean no. I won't give you my savings. I won't sign over my designs. I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm." With that, I stood up and walked out, ignoring their calls and protests. I went straight to the willow tree, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. As I stood there, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. Everything was about to change. In the weeks that followed my refusal, the atmosphere in our house became unbearable. My parents alternated between guilt-tripping and cold silence, while Ethan swung wildly between begging for my help and accusing me of betraying the family. I threw myself into my work, spending every waking moment in my small home workshop. I had been doing commissions on the side for years, building a reputation under the name Willow Designs. Now, I decided, it was time to step out of the shadows. I created a website, showcasing my best pieces. I reached out to contacts I had made over the years, letting them know I was striking out on my own. And then, I waited. The response was overwhelming. Orders started pouring in, more than I could handle alone. I hired 2 assistants, former employees of Lewis & Sons who had been let go during Ethan's mismanagement. We worked around the clock, creating pieces that were as much art as furniture. All the while, I kept my success a secret from my family. They were too wrapped up in their own drama to notice the steady stream of deliveries leaving my workshop, or the fact that I was suddenly able to afford better tools and materials. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially in small towns. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when I overheard my parents talking in hushed, excited tones. "Have you heard about this new furniture maker?" my mother was saying. "Willow Designs? Everyone's talking about them." "Apparently, they're local," my father replied. "Some say their work is even better than ours was in our prime." I froze, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. But then Ethan's voice chimed in, and what he said next changed everything. "We should reach out to them," he said, an edge of desperation in his voice. "See if they'd be willing to collaborate. It might be our last chance to save the business." I retreated to my room, my mind racing. A plan was forming, a plan that made my stomach churn with equal parts anticipation and guilt. It was manipulative, perhaps even cruel. But after years of being manipulated and used myself, I couldn't bring myself to care. The next day, Willow Designs received an email from Ethan Lewis proposing a collaboration. With trembling fingers, I typed out a reply, agreeing to a meeting. It was time to show my family exactly who they had underestimated all these years. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at a local cafe. I arrived early, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I had dressed differently than usual, a sleek blazer instead of my usual work clothes, my hair neatly styled instead of hastily tied back. I looked like a successful businesswoman, which, I realized with a start, I now was. I watched from a corner table as my family entered the cafe. They looked around nervously, clearly out of their element. When their eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition, I felt a twinge of sadness beneath my determination. Had they really seen me so little all these years that they couldn't recognize me now? Taking a deep breath, I stood and approached their table. "Mr. Lewis?" I said, extending my hand to my father. "I'm the owner of Willow Designs. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." The shock on their faces was almost comical. My father's hand went limp in mine, while my mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Ethan was the first to recover. "Harper," he sputtered. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" I sat down, folding my hands on the table. "No joke, Ethan. I am Willow Designs. And I believe you wanted to discuss a collaboration?" What followed was the most surreal business meeting of my life. My family, once they got over their initial shock, swung into action. They praised my work effusively, as if they hadn't spent years dismissing it. They spoke of family loyalty and shared success, conveniently forgetting how they had tried to strong-arm me into giving up my savings and designs. I let them talk, nodding and smiling blandly. When they finally ran out of steam, I laid out my terms. "I'm willing to collaborate," I said, "but on my terms. Willow Designs will remain separate from Lewis & Sons. Any joint projects will be clearly labeled as collaborations, with my name given equal prominence. And I'll need full creative control." My father's face darkened. "Now, Harper, be reasonable. We're family. Surely we can come to a more equitable arrangement?" I met his gaze steadily. "This is the arrangement, Dad. Take it or leave it." They huddled together, whispering furiously. Finally, Ethan turned to me with a forced smile. "We accept your terms, sis. Welcome to the team." As I shook their hands, sealing the deal, I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. This wasn't how I had imagined my success would feel. But it was a start. Little did they know, it was also the beginning of the end. The collaboration between Willow Designs and Lewis & Sons was, to put it mildly, a disaster. But it was a disaster entirely of my family's making. At first, things seemed to be going well. Our joint pieces garnered attention and praise, bringing in a steady stream of orders. But behind the scenes, old habits died hard. Ethan consistently missed deadlines, leaving me to pick up the slack. My parents, in their interactions with clients, downplayed my role, presenting Ethan as the creative force behind our success. And all of them continually pushed for me to fully merge my business with theirs, to come back to the family fold. I stood my ground, reminding them of our agreement. But with each passing day, the resentment grew on both sides. They saw me as ungrateful and selfish. I saw them as manipulative and entitled. The breaking point came 3 months into our collaboration. I arrived at the Lewis & Sons workshop one morning to find Ethan in a panic. He had massively underquoted on a major project, promising delivery in half the time it would actually take. "You have to help me, Harper," he pleaded. "If we don't deliver on time, we'll lose everything." I looked at the plans, the timeline, the quote. It was impossible. Meeting this deadline would require working around the clock, sacrificing quality, and probably losing money in the process. "I can't do it, Ethan," I said. "It's not feasible." His face hardened. Can't, or won't? This is your family's legacy we're talking about, Harper. Or have you forgotten where you came from? Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. Forgotten? How could I forget? You've never let me forget that I'm just the spare, the helper, the one who's supposed to sacrifice everything for the family's precious legacy. Well, I'm done. I'm out. I turned to leave, but Ethan grabbed my arm. You can't do this to us, Harper. We'll be ruined. I shook him off, my voice cold. You did this to yourselves. I'm just finally refusing to clean up your mess. I walked out of the workshop that day, and out of the collaboration. In the following weeks, I watched from a distance as Lewis and Sons imploded. They couldn't deliver on their promises, their reputation tanked, and soon, they were facing bankruptcy, for real this time. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. And a little sad. But mostly, I felt free. It was a crisp autumn morning when I heard the news. My childhood home, the house I had grown up in, with its sprawling backyard and the old willow tree, was going up for auction. My parents, desperate to cover Ethan's debts and their own mounting bills, had no choice but to sell. I stood at my workshop window, staring out at nothing in particular, as a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially ruinous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my chance, not just to secure my own future, but to finally close this painful chapter of my life. The day of the auction dawned bright and clear. I arrived early, my heart pounding as I registered as a bidder. I saw my parents across the room, their faces drawn and tired. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. As the bidding began, I stayed quiet, watching as local developers and investors drove up the price. Just when it seemed like the bidding was about to close, I raised my paddle. 500,000, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. A hush fell over the room. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, but I didn't look their way. I kept my gaze fixed on the auctioneer as a few more bids trickled in. Each time, I countered, my voice never wavering. Going once, going twice, sold. To the lady in the back. And just like that, I became the owner of my childhood home. As the crow